They came without warning, invisible, relentless, unforgiving. Throughout human history, some of the greatest threats to our existence weren't wars or weapons, but pathogens, microscopic killers that wiped out millions and left civilizations scarred forever. Today, we're going on a journey through time, not just to understand how deadly pandemics spread, but to uncover how they changed what it means to be human. But be warned, some of what you're about to hear is almost too horrifying to believe. Let's start in the mid-13th century. Picture this: Europe, 1347. Trade is booming, cities are bustling, markets overflow with spices, textiles, and exotic goods carried along the Silk Road. Port towns are growing, connecting east and west like never before. And yet, within just 4 years, over half of Europe's population will vanish. Not from war, not from famine, but from something no one saw coming. It began in China and Central Asia with a tiny bacterium, Yersinia pestis, hitching a ride on fleas. Fleas that infested rats that traveled on merchant ships. One of the earliest outbreaks was recorded in the city of Kaffa, a Genoese trading port in Crimea, where the disease may have first reached Europe via a Mongol siege. Some historians even believe diseased corpses were catapulted over the city walls as a form of biological warfare. From the ports of Italy, the infection spread like fire through dry grass. Within months, it reached France, Spain, Germany, and England. Death moved faster than anyone could comprehend. People developed strange black swellings, buboes, around the neck, armpits, and groin. These were followed by high fever, vomiting, delirium, convulsions, and then death, sometimes in under 48 hours. There were no treatments, no real understanding of disease. Physicians wore bird-like masks filled with herbs and vinegar, hoping to filter out bad air, a theory known as miasma. It was so brutal, so sudden, that families abandoned each other. Parents fled from children, bodies piled up in the streets. In some towns, there were no priests left to give last rites, no one to dig the graves, and people began to whisper a new name for the disease: the Black Death. But this was more than a mass death event. It didn't just kill people, it dismantled the very fabric of society. Work stopped, food supply chains broke down, entire villages disappeared. Some survivors turned to religious extremism, others to hedonism. In parts of Europe, flagellant cults marched from town to town, whipping themselves in public, believing the plague was God's punishment. For the first time, many began to question their faith. Why would God allow this? Was this divine wrath or something else entirely? And here's something you might not know. Back then, most Europeans didn't bathe. Not regularly, anyway. Water was often feared as a carrier of disease, and communal bathhouses had fallen out of favor due to associations with immorality. And yet, this was only the beginning. Centuries later, another virus would strike, one far more contagious, and in its own way, just as horrifying. It didn't bring death in hours. It took days. But for many, what came after was almost worse than death itself. It left permanent scars, not just on the body, but on culture, identity, even beauty. I'm talking about smallpox, a virus that has existed for at least 10,000 years, making it one of the oldest known to humankind. It was found in the mummified remains of Egyptian pharaohs, and it traveled with armies, merchants, and colonizers across continents. Smallpox attacked more than just the skin. It invaded the bloodstream, attacked bones, and overwhelmed the lymphatic system. Victims suffered from high fevers, fatigue, vomiting, and eventually a blistering rash that consumed their entire bodies. Those who survived, roughly 7 out of 10, were never the same. They were marked, literally, for life, deep, pitted scars across their faces, hands, and torsos. The face became the most visible battlefield. In many cultures, this changed the very idea of what was considered beautiful or desirable. Clear skin became a symbol of strength. In some societies, those without visible scars were seen as lucky, or even elite. But something remarkable happened in the 18th century. An English aristocrat, Lady Mary Montagu, traveled to the Ottoman Empire while her husband served as ambassador in Constantinople. There, she encountered a local practice that was both ancient and radical. People, often women, were intentionally infecting themselves with a milder form of smallpox. The method, known as variolation, involved making a small cut in the skin and rubbing in pus from someone with a mild case. The result? A short illness, and then immunity. Lady Mary had seen what smallpox had done to her own beauty back in England, so she allowed her young son to be inoculated. He lived. When she returned to London, she spoke openly about what she had witnessed. At first, the medical establishment dismissed it, but curiosity grew, especially when the British government began testing the method on death row prisoners. It worked. This Ottoman method came to be known in Europe as the Turkish vaccine. It saved thousands, then tens of thousands, as it slowly spread across the continent. But smallpox wasn't done yet. Even into the 20th century, the virus continued to kill, relentlessly. Entire indigenous populations in the Americas were devastated by it. Colonial expansion often meant unintentional biological warfare. By then, smallpox had claimed close to 500 million lives, more than any war, more than any famine. In sheer numbers, it may have been humanity's most lethal enemy. Only with the rise of global vaccination campaigns, led by the newly formed World Health Organization, did we begin to turn the tide. Early efforts focused on mass immunization. Later, strategies shifted, vaccinating not entire populations, but everyone in contact with a confirmed case, creating rings of immunity. And it worked. On May 8, 1980, the World Health Organization made it official. Smallpox was eradicated, not reduced, not controlled, gone. A virus that had shaped human history for 10 millennia ended with a needle, a rare, monumental victory for humanity. And yet, just as the world celebrated one triumph, a new nightmare was quietly unfolding. It was 1918. World War I was finally drawing to a close. Millions of soldiers were boarding ships, heading home, tired, wounded, and unknowingly carrying something far deadlier than bullets. It began quietly in the crowded barracks of American military camps. Camp Funston in Kansas is often cited as one possible origin point. Soldiers began to fall ill, coughing, fever, fatigue. At first it seemed mild. Then the dying began. The virus spread quickly, from the US to Europe, carried by troop transports, into the trenches of France, the barracks of Britain, and the cities of Italy, Spain, and beyond, and soon into towns and villages across the globe. The world would come to know it as the Spanish flu. But here's the twist. It didn't start in Spain. Spain wasn't involved in the war, and more importantly, its press wasn't censored. While other nations hid the outbreak to maintain morale, Spanish newspapers reported openly, making it appear as though Spain was the source. In truth, it may have started in the US, or perhaps even France or China. The origin is still debated, but the name stuck. This flu was unlike anything before. It didn't just target the elderly or the sick. It disproportionately killed the young and healthy. Those with the strongest immune systems fared the worst. Their bodies responded too aggressively, triggering what scientists now call a cytokine storm, an immune system in overdrive, effectively attacking itself. Lungs filled with fluid, suffocation followed. Within weeks, millions were dead. At its peak, estimates suggest that 1 in every 10 infected people died. Hospitals were overwhelmed, morgues overflowed. In some places, bodies were buried in mass graves. And with the world still reeling from 4 years of brutal war, panic set in. Schools began distributing hygiene manuals. Posters warned people not to spit, to wash hands, to avoid crowds. Cartoonists drew grim images of death wrapped in blankets and riding streetcars. Public messaging became a tool for survival. Governments, for one of the first times in modern history, mandated the use of cloth masks. In the US, people could be fined or even arrested for refusing to wear one. And yet, the virus kept moving. There were 3 distinct waves. The second was the deadliest. Entire towns lost their populations in days. In remote parts of Alaska, whole villages vanished. It all feels hauntingly familiar. An invisible threat, misinformation, public health struggles, social tension. The Spanish flu didn't just shape medicine, it reshaped trust, communication, and the relationship between people and their governments. And by the time it faded in 1919, it had killed at least 50 million people worldwide. Some estimates go even higher, closer to 100 million. More than died in the war that had just ended. But pandemics didn't begin in the 20th century, nor even in the Middle Ages. To find the first recorded global pandemic, we have to go back nearly 1,500 years, to the year 541 AD. The Byzantine Empire was thriving. Constantinople stood as the wealthiest city in the world, center of trade, culture, and military power. Then something dark arrived from the east. It began most likely in Egypt, though some accounts suggest India or China. The disease traveled quietly along maritime trade routes, following grain shipments and merchants across the Mediterranean. What came next was unlike anything the ancient world had seen. In Constantinople, 10,000 people were dying every single day at the peak of the outbreak. There weren't enough people to bury the dead. Corpses were stacked in buildings, dumped into the sea or left on roadsides. It became known as the Plague of Justinian, named after Emperor Justinian I, who himself caught the disease and narrowly survived. Modern research suggests the same bacterium behind the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, was responsible. The numbers are staggering. Historians estimate that this first pandemic may have killed up to 100 million people worldwide over its repeated waves. It struck not just once, but in at least 18 distinct outbreaks across 2 centuries, decimating cities, draining labor forces, and collapsing economies. The Byzantine Empire never fully recovered. Some scholars argue this plague delayed the fall of Rome's eastern half, while others believe it accelerated Europe's fragmentation, paving the way for feudalism in the Middle Ages. It reshaped borders. It changed history. Now here's the truth behind every pandemic we've faced. They all eventually end. Some leave behind vaccines, others, trauma. Some spark revolutions in science and medicine. Others reveal how fragile our systems really are. But they all teach us something, that for all our advancements, humanity remains vulnerable. And yet, again and again, we adapt, rebuild, and continue. Because if pandemics expose our weakness, they also reveal our resilience. Thank you for watching.